Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this Leanpub Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Viktor Farcic. Based in Barcelona, Viktor is a writer and popular conference speaker and senior consultant at CloudBees, which provides companies with enterprise solutions for automating software development and delivery. Viktor is the author of 4 Leanpub books in his DevOps Toolkit series, including his first, the DevOps 2.0 Toolkit, Automating the Continuous Deployment Pipeline with Containerized Microservices, and his latest, the DevOps 2.3 Toolkit, Kubernetes. You can follow Viktor on Twitter at vfarcic, and you can read his blog at technologyconversations.com. In this interview, we're going to talk about Viktor's background and career, professional interests, his books, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his interesting experience with self-publishing. So thank you, Viktor, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
Oh, you're welcome.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you first became interested in computers and software.
So I grew up in Belgrade in Serbia, and my interest in software was out of desperation, I think, because my mom, when I was, maybe 8 or something like that, bought me a brand new Amstrad computer. I'm sure that most people don't know what it is, which came without games, without anything, just a computer, right? And a book in German, which I did not speak. So the only thing I could do is just, open the book, type the same commands without understanding what they do, and then try to figure out what that all means. So lack of games made me a programmer, I think.
And when you were growing up, Serbia wasn't Serbia, was it?
No, it was Yugoslavia, yes. It was a bigger country.
And that so that was a turbulent time politically growing up.
Oh, yeah. No, politically not that much growing up, but then I'm an old guy. So that time, no. But then when 90s came, then all hell broke loose and things went downward from there, I guess.
And that was around the time you were attending university at the University of Belgrade, which I found from LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah. I was studying back then computers at first, then I switched to archaeology as a way to run away from computers. And then they pulled me back in. They figured out they need software for archaeology as well. And
what was it that drew you away from computers? Was that, I guess, having started so early, was that something that other kids that you knew, like on your block were also playing around with?
So, as I said, I started at the beginning because that was the only thing I could do on my brand new shiny computer, just kind of read and write the same thing from a book. And then I guess a lot of time passed, so I can speak about those things. Then I kind of started cracking software and piracy. At that time,
in the early days.
Yeah, so in the 80s, so end of 80s, I was kind of like trying to figure out buying games, cracking them, trying to figure out how to put them on tapes without protection and stuff like that. It was really interesting. And then after that, I started doing some gigs for different companies. And by the time university came, I was already, over 10 years in doing something with computers, and I was kind of a bit sick of it.
It's interesting.
And archaeology.
Sorry, go ahead.
Archaeology sounds like as far as you can get from computers, kind of. And it's kind of cool, sexy. Indiana Jones, kind of. Who doesn't like Indiana Jones, right?
So it was sort of ancient Middle Eastern archaeology that you were drawn to, or?
No, I was mostly prehistoric, kind of Paleolithic, Neolithic, 4,000 years ago, give or take, something like that.
Yeah, that's curious. That's the kind of archaeology my dad was into.
Really?
In his archaeology days, except the sort of Great Plains of North America in that time span. So a lot of trying to figure out what the buffalo were up to in connection with the humans and things like that.
Okay, so yeah, exactly, something like that. It's kind of, in my case, it was mostly in caves.
Okay.
Spending my summer there.
And I have a question about, it's interesting, in the 80s, if you were trying to crack game codes and things like that, a lot of our perhaps younger listeners might not know that in those days you couldn't really just go online and grab tools from all over the place. You had to be resourceful in a different way.
Oh yeah.
Was there a community that you were a part of, or was it, all very independent?
Not really, because not only that's before internet, that's before BSDs. So before modem connecting to somebody, stuff like that, it was a nightmare. I think that I don't remember exactly what I was doing at that time, but I remember that it was a lot of assembler kind of. So before C came into being, kind of like look at the binary and try to find something that looks like the thing you might want to change. So it's, people would laugh, and if I would suggest to do something like that, go through binary code, through assembler, and then try to figure out what's going on, I think that they would put me in a loony bin.
So you tried out archaeology, and you ended up back in computer science. There's a question that I like to ask people on this podcast, which is if you were starting over now, if you were, university age, or if you were giving advice to someone like you who's about starting university age, would you do a computer science degree formally at a university in 2017?
I'm not really sure whether I would do university degree but let's put it this way. It's definitely makes much more sense to do university degree today than it was back then. I think that back then it was kind of usually mathematicians that spent a week of training in some in computer science, and then they would teach you. Really, it was almost a joke back then. But now it's much better. Now, how good it is, I'm not really sure. Still, I do believe that while you do need to learn, learning is an ongoing process throughout the whole career, right? And I still somehow think that until you start working on real projects in a real company for a real customer, you have no idea, no matter how much time you spend in university. I might be radical in that opinion, I guess, but
yeah, no, I've actually heard that in a number of areas from the other side, actually, where for example, there will be people who think the most practical thing they can study at university is business, and then they get out, and the businesses that hire them realize they don't understand anything about what their role, and then the business has to sort of untrain what they've been poorly trained in, and then train them from the ground up in what they really do need to know. And it brings up a very interesting question of what university is for, right? Should universities be considered to be job training centers, or should they be something else? And even if they are to be job training centers, should that mean that they would be following the instructions of companies now for people who are going to be graduating, in half a decade?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Kind of, I have a relatively negative opinion about universities. I mean, I guess it all depends on also what one is studying, because there are certain things that you study and that don't really drastically change from one week to another. So kind of archaeology, of course, I think that everybody who wants to be archaeologist, you should go to university. No doubt about that, right? But software, I would not, to be honest, I wouldn't trust in ability of a professor to teach me software if he's full-time professor. Because things are changing so fast, you cannot catch up without working really in real environment, right? And not only in any company, but some company that is on a cutting edge, right? So if that would make sense, I think that universities should have professors that work only 1 day a week, and the rest of their career they spend solving real problems, so they can actually transmit those solutions and advancements in technology to others. I mean, it's so difficult to be a software engineer these days that I think that whatever you knew last year is not valid anymore. That's how fast it changes.
That's really interesting. So things like, the information science and what a Turing machine is are things that maybe a full-time professor could teach. But when it comes to what you're actually going to be doing and adapting to, what you'll, actually be coding, that's something else.
Exactly. So yeah, of course, there is a base that you need to know, algorithms, tuning machine, all those things, without a doubt. And then the rest is just ever changing.
Yeah, I'll have some questions about that, a little bit later on. Before we go on to talk about your books and DevOps, I wanted to ask you, one of the pleasures of doing this podcast is I get to talk to people from all around the world. Some on the west coast of North America where I am, but some in Europe where you are, and even in Spain. I've interviewed people there before, and I wanted to ask you, one of the questions I get to ask people is, what's the startup scene like where you are?
It's improving greatly. I think that at least in Barcelona, only maybe like last 5 years, we are starting to get something that resembles a good startup scene. But I think that the big problem between Europe, most of Europe, not all, but most Europe and US is that the money moving around startups is quite different. The way how people invest, I have impression that in US investors are more used to the fact that there is a huge risk that you need to invest in 10 startups for one of them to actually be any successful. And in Europe, I think that we still have that culture of, I want to invest in something that is most likely going to work. And you cannot really know with startups. I mean, most of them fail, and then some of them succeed. And if you're lucky, you're going to be investing in a successful one. But you need to invest in many, not in one, kind of. And also,
sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I should say, we're actually based in Canada, so I'm familiar with the situation of watching all the kind of investment news coming from the United States and being in a place where people are more cautious and don't have pockets quite as deep. And it's a very broad generalization, but generally speaking, if you had a kind of archetypal Canadian investor, it would be someone who invests in commodities. And those are people who are, they might be ambitious, but they're not risk takers. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, I'm familiar with watching it be different somewhere else and a little bit slower and more constrained where you are.
Exactly. I think that Europe is very similar to what you described just now, yes.
And what's it like in Serbia?
I don't know. I don't go there much. I kind of completely switched from both family perspective, living perspective, I switched completely to Barcelona. I think I consider myself being Catalan more than Serbian now. And
did you move right after university, or did you spend a few years?
No, actually, it's more complicated. I moved there before I finished university while I was still studying archaeology. I went to Barcelona to give some lectures on their university about computers in archaeology and stuff like that. And I just loved that town so much that I went back home because my suitcase was too small, packed a bigger one, and moved without any plan, without anything. Kind of like I just thought I need to live in this city, and then I'm still there.
And in the mid-90s, could you just move and work, or did you have to get special work visas and become a citizen?
Yeah,
things like that.
Yeah, I had to get the visa and things like that. But one thing that living in Serbia makes you, compared to most other countries, is very resourceful to look out of the box. So kind of like, because of everything that happened, everybody, including me, was used to kind of like, okay, the normal way doesn't work, then let's go this way or that way, and then you figure out stuff.
So you're living in an interesting part of the world right now.
Yeah. We don't know what will happen where I am right in a week from now, but we'll see.
Yeah, there's for those who might not be aware, there's an independence movement in Spain.
Exactly.
And there's been a lot of news around that. Another big, from an outsider's perspective, issue in Spain has been unemployment in the last 10 years or so. And I wanted to ask you, I know this isn't about your books or anything like that, but
sure.
Has that sort of, from at least in North American news, Spain was, big marches in the streets, and similar to news about Greece, all of a sudden you don't hear about it anymore in the just sort of headlines in the North American news. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Have things been improving?
Yeah, so, what was it, when there was a big crisis everywhere, starting from the US, what was it, 15 years ago, something like that? Anyway, Spanish economy collapsed, and that's mostly because it was based on tourism and real estate, the big portion of economy. And those are the two things that are gone first, first disappear when there is a global crisis, right? So when Spain really went down drastically, not as far as Greece and Portugal, but probably close to that. And I think it's still kind of I'm not really following much, but I think it's still around over 20% unemployment. It's definitely better than during the crisis, but it's still not great. At least not on the levels it was before the crisis. And I think that's part of the reason why for all this for independence desire, the worse the situation is, the more nationalism rises and more people kind of start questioning things and then wanting to change things one way or another. By theory, when people kind of live great, then they don't care about things. They start caring about things mostly when things are not so great anymore.
And in particular, youth unemployment is high, I understand. And so you've got a lot of young people thinking with their whole lives ahead of them, and a lot of energy and maybe a desire for change that, older people who are more settled into their lives might not have.
Yeah, it's impossible. At least in Spain, it's close to impossible for a young person to buy an apartment. It's very hard even to rent. Many young people live with their parents, and quite a few Spaniards went to, I don't know, UK, maybe Ireland or something like that, especially in IT. It's not. It's not a bad situation. It all depends on what you compare it with. I live in Serbia, so this is not even near to what was going on there. But it's definitely not a strong economy in Europe right now.
And so you moved to Spain, and you graduated.
No. I just moved to Spain and dropped everything.
Oh, really? Okay.
I literally I'm moving to Spain. I think I took a couple of exams to finish to finish fully university. I just dropped it all altogether. Just moved to Spain.
And then what did you do?
I started programming almost immediately. Continued programming. Got employment in one company, then another, and stuff like that. I maybe at that time I was doubting whether to finish university or not and stuff like that. But then I realized that I think that after you have years of experience, then university is becoming irrelevant. Nobody asks you about your degree. I think when you have experience behind. Degree is important when you say, I know nothing, but then one person knows nothing with the degree and the other one knows nothing without degree, and then of course you're going to pick the one with degree, right? But I already at that time, since I started coding very, very young, I had years of experience working with companies, projects, stuff like that. So I just thought to drop it all together and do my job.
And one of the themes that you write about in your books is failure. And this is woven into it's sort of there are a number of other themes that I noticed in your writing, including adapting to change, which is related to failure. Can you maybe tell the story of what was your first big experience with a failure, whether it was your responsibility or not?
So I think that most of the projects, depends. When I worked for cases where I worked for smaller projects, like a freelancer, that was usually fine. Me only or a couple of guys, so that's usually not a problem. But I think that almost every bigger project where I worked with, and bigger company, I don't think that there was hardly a case where the project was not a failure. It's just that with all the old ways of doing things and waterfall and stuff like that, we invented so many ways how to mask failure as a success. And it's delayed for half a year, but that's a success, because of this and that and stuff like that. I think that most waterfall projects were a failure. Almost every project, I think that lasted for more than months, that's a failure by definition, because you assume that you know what's going to happen in the future, and that's just a wrong assumption. You assume that you know everything in advance, and then you plan the project, and then it's a success or a failure. But since you're planning based on unknowns, you're guessing, you're inventing things. So either you put a huge margin on what you're doing, saying, okay, realistically, this should probably take 3 months, but we're going to say that it's going to take 8 months, and then it's going to be a success. But then nobody would accept a project like that, so you never plan it with such a big margin. It's always a failure. So your answer to your question is every bigger project I worked on was a failure. That's how it is.
Is that how it is, or is that how it was?
It's how it was, I think, because in the meantime, since then, Agile was adopted. We learned how that short iterations are that we should plan a week in advance, maybe weeks in advance, that we should deliver in small iterations, learn from the mistakes and things like that. So I don't think that, and I think that software industry is still full of failures, but those failures are kind of based on very small steps. So I make a step, I make another step, I stumble, and then I continue. So it's not really a failure anymore on a big scheme of things, but it's just small hiccups. When steps are very small, then you never really hurt yourself when you fail, right?
Yes. It's actually it's one of the interesting things about reading the introductions, particularly to your book, is you do talk about how things have changed over time in more detail than we can in a conversation like this. But
yeah,
seeing that personal perspective on going from projects based on a waterfall model to ultimately to sort of continuous deployment methods is just a really interesting story to see. Actually, on the subject of things that are very small, I found a quote from you on Twitter, I think relatively recently, from a talk you gave at DevOps Con, where you say, we can think of the whole computer system like a human body that consists of cells of various types. And I like that metaphor, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Yeah, so it's kind of looking at humans' body as inspiration how to build systems, right? And now, traditionally, we were taught to build big monolithic systems. And if you would compare that with life, that would be, imagine that you now, for example, you're a single-cell organism, right? What happens when you get damaged? Kind of, you cease to exist, you're dead, you're no more, right? Kind of, you have a single point of failure. And the reason why we are so successful as organisms is because there is no, it's not that there is no single point of failure. Give me a gun, I can do that. But in most cases, we're composed of so many small elements, cells, that the extraction of one of them or even a huge number of them is still not affecting significantly how we work. And on top of that, if things are small, doesn't matter whether it's cells or services, they can be easily built, recreated, multiplied, and all those things that are happening in ourselves. So I think that kind of the way how life is organized is I think that's the direction where we are going with microservices, immutable deployments, containers. I find I'm not sure whether I'm inventing an analogy or finding an analogy there, but to me, the systems we are building are more and more resembling how life operates.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions about that, and probably a couple of things to clarify for the audience about microservices and DevOps and things like that. But before we do that, a couple of things you said reminded me about a distinction you make. I think it's in the preface to the DevOps 2.0 Toolkit book, about the difference between being a programmer and being a software craftsman. What is that? What is that distinction?
So it's many of us are kind of working in companies where we are software programmers, where we are taught how to do one certain thing and probably do it very well, and then that knowledge, those skills are exploited to infinite. And when I say exploited, I don't mean in a probably way how people would interpret it, but more in a way you become so good at something that you're utilized to do exactly that thing and nothing else over and over and over again. And then the problem with that becoming really expert in one thing and doing that thing over and over again is that you can very quickly lose your value in the market, right? You're an expert, I don't know, Java 7 developer or whatever, and then the market technology changes so fast that if you stop learning, if you just continue exploiting that expertise, then you have no value outside of your company, and that means that you will gonna become one of those traditionalists that are trying to convince everybody to stick with whatever you know and stuff like that. And I like software craftsman movement because it hence the name. It resembles kind of craftsmanship when we are continuously learning from elders or from other people, not necessarily better than us, but continuously trying to learn and improve. And at the same time, I think that we are becoming less and less specialized. So of course, everybody will have different specialty and all those things, but I think that we as the industry are getting hungry for people who can understand the system as a whole. So even though if you're a programmer, but you still need to know just enough about databases. You need to know how your software is deployed. You need to know how it's tested. You need to know all those things, because if you don't, then whatever is your specialty, whatever you're doing is going to be done badly, because it's not going to take in account all those other aspects of software development lifecycle.
This is, I think, a good moment for me to ask you to give maybe a couple minutes explanation of what DevOps is to people listening who might not know, or who might think they do and don't. Sure.
So I need to start with the explanation of what is Agile. I need to assume probably that they might not know that either. So if Agile was about breaking the silos and creating teams that are capable of developing software without with full autonomy and with very small iterations and so on and so forth. Basically, it's removing lean time. It's removing administrative hurdles from going to one department to another and stuff like that. So with Agile, we got, apart from short iterations and a few other things, we got small teams that are capable to develop software autonomously, right? And now what happened is that when Agile was invented, it was a different world. And then the skill set that is required to be autonomous changed drastically. So if we traditionally with Agile, that would be a testers, developers, business owners, more or less, that's everything you need. And then once you finish developing, you send it to sysadmins, operators, other teams who are going to maintain it. Basically, you do only the half of the cycle. And I think the DevOps is about putting all those people who were coming after those teams into those same teams and extending the scope of what those teams can do. And the scope is, I'm a single team, we are a single team, we are 6 to 8 people, and we can do everything from beginning to the end, including deployment to production, monitoring, responding to pager duty, and all those things. So I think it's extending, it's evolution of Agile, I think. But the difference is that I think that every once in a while, at least in software industry, whenever something good comes along, in time that something gets polluted and then perverted, and then we need to change the name. Instead of saying this is a evolution of this thing, then we change the name and say this is now DevOps, right? I truly think it's just evolution of what Agile started. And so this sort of from a very high level, it sort of used to be that you'd have some programmers developing software, and then they would hand it off to other people whose job was to, put it on the servers and actually
give it to people
exactly
to use. And then, what happened over time was the idea developed that these two activities shouldn't necessarily be treated as discrete, but rather as sort of strongly related to each other and integrated with each other. And in particular, as I understand it, one of the pressures in that direction was that deployments started happening more quickly and in smaller iteration and in smaller steps, as you were talking about before. And so if you can sort of have change something in your code and then have it live in a few minutes, that connection between how it's written and how it's deployed and then how it's going to be served up to people, I guess, needs to be much more tightly connected.
Exactly. If you go back in time when how we were developing software before, a typical project would be like half a year, and then we have different things that needs to be done, like developing, testing, deployment, and things like that. And each of those activities would last for weeks or months. And in between those activities, we would hand over what we call throwing over the wall and say, okay, now it's your turn to spend 2 months on this. And if I'm waiting for your feedback for a while, does not really matter on a big scheme of things because the whole project is a full year. So if I'm going to wait for something for a month, it's not really the end of the year, the world. But now the speed of deployment is such that I'm expected to deliver a new feature within a day. We just agree, we want to go do this, excellent. It's going to be in production today or tomorrow, maybe or a week from now. So there is no time to lose, even to lose a single day in waiting for somebody else to do something else because whatever you're requesting that person to do, he has some other queued items and all those things. No? So it's instead of having small horizontal teams that are each team is very specialized into certain activity. Like this team is a test.
This might be a good moment for me to ask you to also talk a little bit about what microservices are.
Sure. So microservices so imagine that you have a system that does many things, right? Let's say Amazon website, right? And then microservices would be, instead of having one big monolithic system like that, you would split it into smaller pieces and have a completely separate service that serves as a shopping cart. One would be product catalog, and the third one would be login and registration, right? And then once that is split into small pieces, then you can have smaller teams working on each of them. So instead of having 200 people working on a single product, you have 20 teams, 10 people each, working each on their own software or service.
And does that create, I imagine that makes some things much more efficient and easier to do, but it also means that all these things need to be connected to each other and work together.
Yeah, so there are, so it makes it easier in sense that of autonomy. You don't need to wait for somebody else to do something, right? You can just move at your own speed and deliver updates to shopping carts as fast as you can without thinking about what's happening with the rest of the system, no? And then communication between those services, that is a challenge that we are solving now with containers, schedulers, and service discovery and things like that, which I'm not sure whether I'm never certain what I'm pretty sure that now I'm talking about things that don't mean much.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. So one thing, one very concrete thing that you write about is test-driven development. And how does this world where you've got things sort of split up into these multiple teams or multiple services, how does testing change when you're operating in an environment like that?
Okay, so traditionally what would happen is that we develop something, and then once that something is developed, we would run some tests to validate whether that something is correct. And in most cases in the past, those tests would be very very long-term and manually executed. And whenever you introduce a new change, then you would need to run again all those manual tests again. And then we moved into having automated tests. So because that speeds up the whole process, because if something is repetitive, if you test the same feature over and over again, then the automation really brings you a lot of value. But the problem is that if you write automation after you wrote the code, two things will happen. First, the automation is going to mimic the code because you're already subjective. You already saw what the code does, and then most likely you're going to create a test code automation that will mimic that instead of having a clear mind, kind of ignoring what you know that is already done. And another problem with that is that automation or testing done after the product is usually too late, because it would be the same thing as if we would create an assembly line for cars, and we would produce the cars and test whether they work or don't. And if they don't, then we're going to start over, right? With test-driven development, the process is somehow reversed. Meaning that we write first tests that serve two purposes. One is obvious, to validate something that we are about to do, and the another purpose is to define what should be done. So requirements of what, by writing tests first, you're defining what will be done next. It serves as a kind of requirement of what you're going to develop. And on top of all of that, now coming to test-driven development, apart from proposing the tests are written before the code itself, tests are written before the functionality is developed, tries to do that with very short iterations. So between writing, I would spend maybe a minute writing a test and then validate a minute writing code that makes those tests pass and eventually creates a functionality. And then I would repeat the process over and over and over again. So while 15 years ago, development was lasted for months and testing lasted for months after development, and then we would go back and forth to correct the problems. Now the iterations with test-driven development last in minutes instead of months as before.
And
so everything just shorter.
And is there, if you've got, say, a company with a culture that doesn't already have a sort of test-driven development procedure in place, is it difficult to convince people that you should do things that way?
Very. Because, and especially in case of test-driven development, because it's about changing the culture of a company. And the culture of a company is much, much harder to change, to update, to modify than technology. Technology comes easy. And in case of test-driven development, it's all about having different approach, different processes than changing a certain technology. And people, especially old-timers, if somebody's used to do something in a certain way for 10 years, then telling that somebody that that's not the right way to do things is very, very hard to accomplish. And on top of that, if somebody would adopt test-driven development, that would mean that that somebody will start questioning the value of, let's say, a testing department. Because if I'm going to write my own tests and then I'm going to write code behind those tests or features, then why do we need a testing department? Which is also not true. We do need them, but probably not in that quantity as we needed them before. So it's both about changing the culture and disrupting certain established departments and maybe people's security in their work and a few other things.
One thing you write about as well is self-healing systems. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I believe it's connected to the idea of automating things and doing things as quickly as you can, and then also having, microservices, all these separate things working together at once, and testing.
Yeah, so self-healing is... So actually there are two concepts. self-healing and self-adaptation, and I think that they go back to my analogy with, let's say, human body. Is so in our own bodies, we are continuously being attacked by viruses and things happen to us. Most of those things we don't notice because our organisms self-heal, right? You get hurt, those cells will die and new cells will be recreated, and all those things are happening without us going to a doctor. And then there is self-adaptation, meaning that if I'm running, then the number of things happening in my body and things created, and simply the state of my body needs to change to accommodate that external influence, those external influences or changing conditions. And I think that the same thing we are trying to apply to software systems, so that instead of some creating, when this thing happens, do that. We are trying to automate or leave humans, to say the least, trying to do creative things. Like each one of us should go in the morning to an office, if you work in an office, and do something you didn't do yesterday. And all those repetitive things, like what happens when a server goes down? When a server goes down, then you follow this process, right? What happens when service is unavailable? Then you follow that process. When all those repetitive things can be easily given to machines to deal with it themselves. And I think that's self-healing, trying to recuperate from failure in a fully automated way. And with self-adaptation would be to increase or decrease the number of replicas of a service or the number of servers running depending on the traffic, right? In the morning, for example, we might have relatively few users to our website, and we need relatively few servers to serve those users. And then in the afternoon, the number of users might jump up, and we need more servers. And all those things should be fully automated. And so that we leave people, first of all, because automation is more reliable, because it's repetitive in exactly the same way, it's much faster, and does generally a better job than us. And that at the same time frees us to do more interesting things, because who really wants to go to work every day and do exactly the same what you did yesterday, and do it in a way that with the result that is much worse than if we let machines do that. So I think that the next step in evolution of what we do as programmers would probably go beyond that and then towards some kind of machine learning and creating more intelligent systems capable of doing things without us.
That's interesting. You're touching on, I imagine, deliberately on, the very controversial topic of automation generally. I'm sure they're probably not listening to this podcast so much, but I'm sure I know there are a lot of people out there who would love to go to work every day and do the same thing again, and could care less if a machine would be better or worse than them at it. What's your take, just to sort of go sideways a little bit on this theory that, or this idea that the machines are going to take all the work away from the people?
I don't think that will ever happen from people in general, because at least not in any foreseeable future. We are still more intelligent than machines. We have capacity to be creative, to come up with new stuff. Machines are mostly very good at doing repetitive things today. I don't know really what will happen 100 years from now, 50 years, but in any foreseeable future, machines are not going to replace people. What will happen is that machines are replacing people who have difficulty to change what they do. Like, for example, what will happen with taxi drivers when autonomous cars become a norm, right? It will be a huge problem unless they can change the way how they operate their business. But if they just do exactly the same what they're doing today, then they might be in real danger of being fully replaced. So I don't think that we are going to be replaced by machines, but what we do will and is constantly changing. So as long as each one of us individually can adapt to those changes, then we should be fine.
You have a great line and sort of bracing line in your latest book where you write, "There is no alternative to a constant struggle to be competitive." And it's interesting in this context when people kind of load up into their minds concerns about automation taking away jobs from people, they often treat the current status quo as something that was always the case. Whereas, of course, we all know there was a time when, there was guys driving horses and buggies around, and then that got replaced by the, people driving the cars around. Everything has always been a constant struggle, but people often want to treat some position they've attained as the stable and natural state of affairs. And I do find it really interesting that there is, amongst the themes in your writing, this idea of constant change and constant adaptation is something that we always need to keep in mind in our careers and in the systems that we build.
Exactly. One difference I think important, what you said, I fully agree. Those changes were happening always throughout history, right? Like look at the Industrial Revolution. Everybody thought that they're going to lose jobs and nobody did. But what is different is that those changes in the past were happening from one generation to another. And now that frequency increased so much, it's happening within a single generation. You have multiple drastic changes happening to us in the way how we work. So we cannot just rely on idea, I can reach pension as I am, but my children will need to adapt. Now you need to adapt. I think that's the difference maybe with the past.
Another difference with the past too, you write in that book as well, the Kubernetes book, every company is a software company. And I wonder if in your work with clients over the years, has that been something that people in the executive suite have embraced or even understood?
No, I don't think they did yet. It at least depends how you define understood, because people very often throw away catchphrases. So I hear often people saying, yeah, we are now a software company. But I don't feel that they truly understand what that means. Because if they do, then they would become aware that they need to make drastic changes. Because if you're, let's say, a bank, your business is drastically different than it was 10 years ago. You don't need offices anymore. You don't need vaults and all those things. And if your business drastically changed, that means that the whole way how you organize your company and where you put focus needs to change as well. And I think that there are many companies are still saying those things without realizing how much change they need to introduce to comply with those phrases. And it's very, very hard. And a company, I don't know exact statistics, I don't remember it anymore, but something like only a few Fortune 500 companies that existed like 15 years ago, something like that, still exist today. I don't think that people are aware that how fast things are changing and how much, if you don't adapt, and adaptation today means being fully software company. Otherwise, the alternative is just to disappear.
Yeah, some of the sort of stories I hear is people saying, that when it gets to a high enough level where decisions are made about where money's going to go, people often can have the attitude that, the computers are just this cost center and just this annoyance that I sort of, have to throw money at every once in a while. And they'll, when security, for example, comes up, they'll just say, what are the chances that, that data might be stolen? And they go, that's not worth spending any money on, or that's only worth spending this much money on. Do you think those are attitudes that are going to, given what you just said about, churn in the Fortune 500, is this something that's just going to naturally change with, corporate evolution?
No, that will definitely change. It's just that in most cases that will change by corporations disappearing, and in other cases that will happen by corporations changing drastically, right? Otherwise, like who would have said, for example, even 5 years ago, that a television is a software business, nothing else, right? And look at Netflix today. And then look what happened to most television channels. They're in real trouble, at least in Europe. I like to say when people ask me questions like, oh, but I really like what you're talking about, and I would really like to do that, but my companies, they're so traditional, they would never allow me. And I usually give them advice like change the company or change the company. Try to change how your company operates. Go somewhere else because that company will not exist for long.
I see. Change your company or change companies.
Exactly.
You deliberately chose self-publishing as a path for your DevOps Toolkit series, which I don't know if it began as the idea for a series, but it definitely turned into that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that decision. Why was self-publishing so important for these books?
So the way how I work is very chaotic. I don't start writing a book like I have a plan, then I'm gonna do index, and then I'm gonna create a summary of each chapter, and so on and so forth. And once I spent a month thinking about it and planning, I'm gonna start writing. My approach is very chaotic. I just start writing about things that I'm interested in at that moment. And then at one moment that starts getting shape and form and becomes a full-blown book. And that really does not work well with how traditional publishing companies work. But I think, and at least those were my reasons behind the first book. But then I realized that actually it's much more, and I think that the true reason for me self-publishing is the ability to publish something that is just started. Like I publish maybe when I reach 15% of a book. I think that the latest is around 20 right now. And it's something like, okay, guys, whoever wants this book, take it. I just started it. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what's going to be the end result of the book.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. I think it's in your third book, the DevOps 2.2 Toolkit, self-sufficient Docker clusters. You're explicit at the beginning about how you began without a plan, and you just wanted to see how it would turn out, and not just the journey isn't you're not alone. You've got your readers going along with you, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that because you get a lot of feedback from people while you write.
Yeah, so after my first book with Leanpub, I opened a Slack channel where every reader can join, and we have those constant communications, I think, in real time. Some of them are shy and send me private messages, some of them are public. So they just get notification, new chapter is out, they read it, a day later they start sending me feedback like, this is horrible, this doesn't work, I don't like this, oh, this is great, but how about putting this in the next chapter, right? And I kind of like it because I'm giving people what they want, not what I think they want.
That's really interesting. And you write too about having books in maintenance mode.
Yeah, I think that's my another complaint, especially behind printed copies, is, of course, if it's a novel, let's say Harry Potter, I think that's great, and there is not much reason to change there. But for something like technology, things are changing so fast that buying a book that somebody wrote 2 years ago and haven't updated anymore should be kind of illegal almost. Because things change so fast, and then at least in case of my books, I think those who buy them, they can maybe think of them more as a better structured blog where I'm going to continue adding stuff and then updating stuff as technology changes or my experience changes. So, of course, maybe years later that does not happen anymore, but at least for the first couple of years, it's even when it's 100% done, it's still not done. It's getting continuously updated.
And you do have print copies of versions of your book available on Amazon. I was wondering, just for those listening who are or are considering self-publishing, how did you manage that process?
So once I get from Leanpub the files for prints and ebooks and stuff like that, it's just registering on, in case of Amazon, that would be KDP and Create Space. KDP is for ebooks on Amazon and Create Space for printed copies. Just about registering there, filling a couple of fields and uploading the file given by Leanpub, and it's probably like 15 minutes process altogether.
Well, that's great to hear. That print ready PDF is what I like to call a battle hardened feature. And I can thank we can all thank the hard work that many Leanpub authors put into giving us feedback into that process as well. Is one of the reasons you can normally get away with just uploading it and being ready to go.
Sorry. One thing that I noticed, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
If you look at the sales, kind of how much comes from Leanpub and Amazon, for example, I've really noticed a huge change. Is that at the beginning, years ago, when I published the first one, after it was 100% published, most of my sales were coming from Amazon. And I think that the user base behind Leanpub and Advantages are growing so much that now Amazon is much smaller user base in case of my books than Leanpub itself. I'm even doubting whether it makes sense to go to Amazon for my fifth book whenever that comes.
That's really interesting feedback.
It's kind of okay. So maybe not a good doubting since it's such a simple process. It takes me 15 minutes. I will always put it on Amazon. But compared to 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the percentage from Leanpub is increasing compared to that might be for a niche kind of readers interested in technology. I'm not sure, or in general. But definitely increasing the odds.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's a couple of things I can speculate about that go towards explaining that. One is just Leanpub is older and people are more familiar with buying in progress books and that concept, and the idea that in particular maybe technology books are something that you should be buying in a format that can be updated. But also in particular with your books, the importance of community, I think is something that people have, grown more familiar with over time. And building that community through Leanpub is probably easier than through Amazon, in particular because we make it so easy to do in progress publishing and send updates to people, like send emails to people if you have a major update and things like that. My last selfish question is, if there was one thing we could build for you or one thing we could fix for you, what would that be?
Ooh. I'm not sure. I cannot recall something that I really disliked and don't have. Maybe I'm not sure whether I got so used to it that I like now everything, and I had problems in the past and I forgot about them, but nothing really comes to my mind.
Okay, well, if something does come up, please come to mind afterwards. Please, shoot me an email and let me know, because feedback from battle-hardened authors is really important to us and really helps everybody else who uses Leanpub in the future. Well, thanks very much for your time in the evening there, Viktor, for taking the time to do this interview and for being a Leanpub author.
Thank you for having Leanpub.
Thanks.